This chart highlights the benefits and downsides of using PMMA haptics versus PVDF haptics for the Yamane technique. Right off the bat, in terms of availability, the PMMA haptics win this by a landslide. And why is that? Because most lenses are made of PMMA haptics. The IOLs that have the PVDF haptics are much harder to get. In terms of cost, for the most part, these PMMA haptics are generally less expensive and they're more readily available relative to the PVDF haptics. Number 3, the PMMA haptics, when cauterized, create a flat bulb, whereas with PVDF haptics, it creates an elevated mushroom-like bulb. A flat profile is theoretically less likely to erode through the conjunctiva due to its flat nature, whereas an elevated shaped flange is more likely to make contact and potentially erode through conjunctiva. And so the difference again is a flat bulb versus elevated bulb, and with the PMMA haptics, a lower risk of exposure versus a higher risk of exposure with PVDF haptics. In terms of risk of kinking, when cannulating the 30 gauge TSK needle and the haptics, there is a higher risk of kinking, as I've illustrated here with PMMA haptics relative to PVDF haptics. Now, it should be noted that with added experience, the concern of kinking becomes considerably low with PMMA haptics, but certainly in the early learning curve for the Yamane technique, kinking may be more observed with the PMMA haptics. And lastly, and this is a very important concept, is the concept of surgical versatility. And the PMMA haptics win this over the PVDF haptics. And what I'm referring to is that a lot of patients do present with a dislocated 3-piece IOL from many years ago. And these lenses are likely made of PMMA haptics. And so if you already know how to do the Yamane technique with PMMA haptics, then you can use that old dislocated 3-piece IOL that's already in the eye and you can perform the Yamane technique. If you can only do the Yamane technique with PVDF haptics, then that decreases your surgical versatility because you're not accustomed or have experience with PMMA haptics, meaning that you'll have to explant the already dislocated 3-piece IOL and then place that specific 3-piece IOL with PVDF haptics. And I have a few videos showing how I've refixated an old dislocated 3-piece IOL that has PMMA haptics. And so overall, if we're going to compare the two haptics here, the main benefit for the PVDF haptics is the reduced risk of kinking. That is useful for early beginners of the technique, whereas the risk is higher with PMMA haptics. But otherwise, in terms of availability, in terms of cost, in terms of flange bulb creation and risk of exposure, and in terms of surgical versatility, the PMMA haptics have those categories won over the PVDF haptics. I hope you found this chart to be useful, and thanks for watching.